Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. For those of you who are new to this show, let me tell you a little bit about what Data Unchained is about. We started this podcast a couple of years ago as we were looking at organizations of all different markets, trying to figure out the best practices, the best tools, the best policies to put in place to use their decentralized and scattered data sets. And as we all come from a different part of the market, the world, the technology stack, we can imagine that there's data being created everywhere now in space, on devices, data centers, cloud, instruments, and different types of people are wanting access to that data now, especially with the advent of AI. And so what Data Unchained really unpacks is what are some of the challenges that organizations are coming across, the technologies or tools that are being put into place to help them, and then ultimately, what are the business outcomes? If you go down this path of maybe a different route of using your decentralized data, what kind of business outcomes can you get? So with that, let me introduce today's guest. Kevin Moore is the CEO of Quilt Data. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Molly. Thanks for having me.
And Kevin was introduced to us through a mutual friend over at AWS. So, I think our AWS friends who were part of the problem of creating decentralized data with cloud regions everywhere, they are also part of the solution of bringing together technologies and partnerships to make that really viable. Great partner over there. Kevin, tell us a little bit about your background before we talk about Quilt Data.
Sure. So, from a professional background, I really am kind of an engineer at heart. Was fascinated with computers at a young age and had a grandfather who happened to have an early one, had a father who, was working with computers in the early days. And my gray hair would prove it. When I say the early days, I'm talking like the late 70s and early 80s, back when these things were big honking plastic-sided boxes with teeny tiny CRT screens. But I, tried to get away from that and thought I would go, build physical things. And then I kept getting drawn back to this problem of computing and ended up getting a degree in, computer architecture and really made my specialty on the kind of the interaction between computer hardware and computer software. And that led me to places like Sun Microsystems at Oracle. Before getting this kind of uninformed decision to go after starting a company of my own.
So as a founder, what problem were you looking to solve with Quilt Data? What was the big thing you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the thing that just kept, this was, take you back in time a ways. This is like, we first started thinking about it, believe it or not, as early as 2013. I was working at the time at Oracle on in-memory database computing, and data warehouse scales were getting massive. The NoSQL movement was trying to extend that even further than at the time we thought data warehouses could go. But as I saw the cloud moving together, two trends really hit me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. One was the cloud and just how powerful that was. Elastic computing that companies didn't have to manage, that could be managed at a scale and an ability, beyond what any individual company could. And this just seemed like it was taking over. And as a database person, what the cloud meant is that not only was really all of the world's computing coming together in a physical and like a physical space and in a kind of standardized stack, it also meant that all of the data that used to be siloed and physically remote in the university's computer centers or in a company's server. And the hardest problem from a database perspective is always the distributed join. And imagine a global scale distributed join in this pre-cloud world where all of the interesting data that, when combined, could unlock new insights was scattered around the universe. And now, fast forward to a cloud world where those data sets are literally sitting on top of each other, possibly in the same rack. This is orders of magnitude more. And that's the thought of like, wow, what could we learn if all of a sudden we could seamlessly combine information from financial systems, from weather, from manufacturing, from, human conversations, from biology, from chemistry. If all of that were accessible and combinable, what could we do and how much faster could we learn? And then the second thing that hit me was we had just gone through this revolution in software, open source software kind of taking over the world, and Git and GitHub being a huge part of that, where and not just Git and GitHub, to be honest, it's tools. It was a whole stack from Git, GitHub, Docker, making it possible to grab libraries and components of software that were written by other people around the world and put those into practice in minutes, in a very reliable, consistent way. And so when I thought about this amazing potential for data sets coming together and started to kind of work on the problem, the thing that really crystallized was, how do we build a software system that makes it as easy to work with data sets as it is to work with code today?
Those are definitely real, probably some of the challenges that organizations readily identify with and have seen some of the journey of, like Git and whatnot evolving, and that's been great. Quilt Data is focused in the life sciences space, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes and no. I mean, technologically, no, but yes. I mean, the life sciences story is kind of a funny one. We were, startup, kind of struggling startup pre-COVID, and I certainly, all of us will remember that. Where were you, in March of 2020, and what happened? But one of the things that happened to us is we were working with a lot of scattered machine learning teams across a lot of verticals. And a lot of people might forget that this is pre-GPT, pre-AI, at least as the taking over the world sense. And a lot of that AI-focused work and machine learning work was very speculative. And a lot of those projects got canceled in, April and May of 2020. Yes. And so our sales pipeline went from a vertical agnostic pipeline to, we're a biotech company. If I look at our customer base, all of a sudden it was just like, we're a biotech company now. We got to figure this out. And it turned out it's a space that's personally meaningful to me. I'm not a biologist. It's kind of funny in my background, that was the one science I never actually officially took, even in high school. But we became a biotech company, and it's one that's been really rewarding to work with some of the smartest people in the world, working on some of the toughest challenges with real human impact. So to be a person who has no background or ability to, say, cure cancer, but to be able to put my skills to work in a way that can help people work on things like curing cancer, improving outcomes for people with brain disease, genetic disorders, rare diseases, it's incredible. It's really rewarding.
It absolutely is. I think my favorite customer I've worked with in that space, and there's so many of them, there's so many with impact, but I've worked with St. Jude's through pretty much my entire career in one way or another. And as they implemented high performance computing and then machine learning, all to help infant mortality rates go down, it's like, what thing could you care more about and feel better about being a part of? So I get it. And that happens throughout all the fields in life sciences, for sure.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about, where are your data sources coming from? Like, what type of data are you generally bumping into?
There's a lot of diversity in the life sciences, and there's a couple of different dimensions to your questions about what type of data are we working with. Our system is focused on the cloud data, specifically right now from a commercial standpoint in AWS. Technologically, we certainly have plans to expand that to on-prem storage and other storage systems, but it's really geared towards large-scale data and multimodal data. And in the life sciences, a lot of that are coming off of instruments. So everything from, at the high end, this would be things like the cryo-electron microscopy that's pulling out, very high resolution images of things like protein structures. But it can be even kind of a spectrum all the way there. A lot of sequencing data, gene sequencing has really been revolutionizing the biotech era. Nothing more impactful, perhaps, or more touching more people more quickly than in COVID, the mRNA vaccine development. That's, directly a sequencing application leading to therapies for humans. Lots of sequencing data going into AWS, going into Quilt, but also instruments that are more desktop instruments like mass spectrometry, flow cytometry, things that are generating gigabytes, tens of gigabytes of data that are just big enough that they're hard and cumbersome to deal with for some of the kind of file share systems, and also very now more and more of this data is moving into compute first, AI first data analysis, and kind of human as the second pass. And so having that all accessible in a cloud and compute accessible storage is really powerful for our customers.
And I was looking at your website this morning before we jumped on the call. I probably won't get the language exactly right, but you're really focused on helping with outcomes with scientific discovery and automating some of this data processing, data management. Can you go into a little more detail of, from like the voice of the customer, from the life of the customer, what problems with data management can you put to rest? And for those of you listening who aren't part of this industry, it's kind of a long enduring problem of researchers create their own data. They know about their own data, but it's been difficult to share with other researchers just based on workflow, but also policy and regulation. So data management in this field is kind of a long-standing challenge for sure. I'd love to understand a little bit more, how do you make that better?
Let me start with a little bit about the industry. So it's really fun industry to work on, and an engineer's idea of fun is that means they're great problems to have. And I definitely have that, like, oh, these are juicy problems. So I'd say we attack three particular pain points, and that is, one is enabling collaboration across discipline, domain, and skill set. And two is tracking for IP protection and regulatory compliance. And the third, again, hitting on regulatory compliance, is data governance and access control and auditability, again, primarily for both for security and for that compliance. And some of the things that are interesting in the industry, let's start with the obvious one first. Even at the research level, there are, compliance requirements. Let's say it's pretty loose in the early days. You can work on non-human sample data in a pretty loose way. But if you want to take that data and transform that into a therapy that's going to go into a human, even in a clinical trial, you do have to go through a regulatory process. You have to file an IND filing with the FDA and say, we want to take this candidate to trial. And to do that, you have to show two things, right? You have to show, okay, we're not going to hurt anybody in this process, but we also have evidence that this is going to lead to a better outcome, efficacy, right? What have we done and what have we discovered that justifies the need to take this forward? And so that has evolved into human processes of documentation and scientific rigor. It's also evolved a whole suite of tools to capture the activities of the scientists. What have they done? What experiments have they run? What was the purpose of the experiment? What did they find? And one of the interesting things that we found out going in and we were kind of pulled into this space. Some customers discovered our solution and said, we have this real need. Like, we are dutifully documenting all of the things that the scientists are doing, but we're not keeping track of what data they generated and what data they used. And we want to use your system of versioning and metadata bundling to do that. And we kind of scratched our head and thought, wow, that's a great application for what we're doing. Yeah, let's learn about that. How do you spell that IND thing? Like, what's going on? No, I'm just kidding. So we really, this was early days. So we've been doing this for years now, and that really is a fantastic fit there. So when we engage with a customer like this, we're often, a really interesting thing that happens is we typically have about 50-50 users between computational scientists who are, oftentimes have come up with a genetics or bioinformatics background, who have a strong sense of programming and code and work on computational processes, and people who might call themselves bench scientists, who are biologists first, who have a deep understanding of life sciences. They're subject matter experts in their domain, but they might write some R or Python scripts, but they're not going to go in and really, they think in science first and code second. And so how do we find a solution for collaboration on those tools where the computational folks would be comfortable, like, let's check everything into Git, the bench scientists would be much happier if everything lived in SharePoint, and the IT is stuck in the middle, like, wait, we have to lock everything down and make sure it's secure and manage our costs and make sure everything's coming to compliance. So we've engineered a solution that says, let's put everything in the customer's storage in S3. It's cheap, it's durable, IT loves it. It's actually fine and good for the computational folks because all of the computational systems in the world, or at least anything that's going to run in the cloud, can talk to that. The trick is, how do we make an S3-based storage system collaborative, intuitive, and usable by the bench scientists who don't even have AWS credentials and, would prefer not to?
Exactly. So how do you do that? Or is it kind of a natural language interface to the bench scientists? Like, what does it look like to them?
Yeah, I'd say that's evolving. So, the natural language is coming along really fast, and we're at a period of incredible change. I think that's kind of Captain Obvious moment. But what it looks like at first is actually to bridge the gap between kind of a versioned, labeled, computation-friendly data construct and something that a bench scientist is going to be familiar with. And for them, it's a folder. They need to think of this as like, if their mental model goes further than a folder, like, we get a lot of friction. It's like, no, it's a folder, but it's a special folder. It's a folder that's version locked, that links to your notebook, and that has these metadata properties that explain what it is and what the relevant meta information is, where did it come from, how to find it. And then when they use it for a bit and they realize that, oh yeah, that metadata actually is really a good rigor and it helps us find the data sets that we need. And it also then is really beneficial when they go to use an AI natural language interface, then they really start to embrace it.
So making it work with the tools on their machines the way they're used to, that's an awesome advancement for sure. The creation of the metadata, the context that you're adding, how do you do that? Do they have a responsibility there still to describe which instrument, which project, which protease, whatever it is that maybe they need to, or are you able to take a lot of that out of their hands?
Yes and no. So, our system doesn't infer metadata. It certainly doesn't invent metadata. And the metadata has to come from somewhere, and it comes from real places with real meetings. But we do have everything is kind of API first and automation first. So our real guiding principle is that it should never have to be entered more than once, and preferably zero. So it should be ideally entered once by the system that creates it, and then once entered, it should be transferable. And we've tried to create as open and simple a system as we can so that it makes it very easy to build those automations.
What does the outcome of this look like? What can these scientists do now that perhaps they were limited on before? Maybe things move faster and therefore they can do new things, or what does that kind of look like?
Let's think of the reorg that happened. So we're not really talking about, like, if we look at one piece in isolation, it doesn't look that impressive. If the bench scientists go like, well, I had everything in SharePoint, now I have everything in Quilt, like, what do I get? I had folders before, I have folders now. Yeah, I have better version locking. I have better, maybe lower cost of storage. And then, but what's really powerful is that when you have your instrument data not in a different system from your sequencing data, you start to be able to ask questions that bridge the gap in a much easier way. And it makes it much easier now for your AI assistants to come in and actually work with the data. So a common thing that we see is that now AI is becoming the bridge between the systems, between their electronic lab notebook, which is what they're using to document their experimental protocols, and has taken a lot of the kind of data management on the smaller data side, individual files, which sample did I pull from which freezer when, and what are the characteristics of that sample, to I've got terabytes of sequencing results from this, not one sample, but collections of samples. And we'd want to ask things, we just did a case study with a customer using AI to link their notebook is a system called Benchling, which is one of the leading electronic lab notebooks. And of course, Quilt is managing their data in S3. In this case, it was RNA-seq. And a very simple question that came up over and over again was they would run pairs of experiments. They're looking at genes being regulated, either what they call upregulated, kind of turned on or turned off based on different interactions. And that's the goal of developing these therapeutics, is kind of regulate gene activity and what the genes translate into protein and protein production. And they actually measure that with a different experiment. So they want to ask very basic scientific questions like, did I get the protein? Did we measure the protein abundance level that we expected based on what the gene regulation told us was happening? And it turned out that if you take the old way of doing it and siloing off your small data experiments in one system and you put, like in a file share that's less computationally accessible, and you take your sequencing experiments and run them in the cloud in AWS Batch and dumping in S3, they were solving that problem with a combination of Slack and manual Python scripting. And now giving AI, and thanks to the standardization around things like MCP, AI can go into a system like Quilt. First of all, find the relevant data easily because everything is indexed and tagged with its metadata. They can pull that. They can use powerful analytical tools. In this case, I think they used AWS Athena to do an AI written SQL query across this tabular data, pull that result back, and then make the similar query via the MCP to the LIMS system or the ELN system and merge those things together. So now what would have been a couple of days of coordinating between scientists on different teams, and maybe a couple hours of individual work becomes like 5 minutes of AI, churning. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty big win.
Absolutely. That concept of, kind of air quote, AI ready data and making that fast and efficient is something that seems to be quite the rage, even at GTC with Jensen talking about how are we really going to put the age of inference into high speed. And it sounds like this is a great part of that to break down the data silos, get the tooling and the context built, and get the data visible to whatever you're using on the AI side. I mean, it sounds like perfect timing to be getting this into the market.
Absolutely. And the two things you said that I just want to highlight on is tools and context. And those, in our experience, are the things that move the needle. And the tools can be tricky, but luckily AWS gives us a lot of building blocks. And so we've built things like using the built-in AWS services like Athena. Can we feed in data to that based on tabular files that we find? Certainly search is one thing, connecting the right, it's kind of a double use of context, because some of the same information that leads to good search and good identification is part of the context. And then jumping to the second, one of the absolute key to working with these frontier models that are so powerful is just providing them with the right context. Not too much, not too little, all the relevant information, kind of, but nothing else. And so I think that's what we're well positioned. I'm of course extremely biased, but this construct that we have of a rich annotated data set is working really well, working with this kind of AI model, because the context is basically traveling with the data set. And this is kind of this transition from data as amorphous, maybe distributed concept, to a data set, which is a discrete versioned unit with specific context that can be analyzed either by a human or an LLM, and oftentimes explored collaboratively between humans and LLMs. And even more interestingly enough, there's the collaboration between teams of humans, each with their LLM assisting them. And so how do we build a system that supports that level of collaboration with human AI pair collaborating with other human AI pairs. And from the solution that we've gotten so far, some important criteria to provide are, first of all, handing off all the relevant context in a concrete way. Version control on that is absolutely essential. We took, let's take the example I was talking about with kind of RNA-seq and protein abundance. Scientists has asked this question, did we get the protein levels that we expected? How well, not just did we or didn't we, but how well do we see a correlation between what we expected and what we measured? But now, instead of handing off a small, an email or a single file dump, or maybe worse, like a PowerPoint slide, we're handing off this discrete version data set. We call it a data package that now contains, the serialized data frame of the results, the visualization of that plot, the SQL queries and references to the tables that backed them, and metadata about the upstream samples and where to find them. And now that as a unit is something that another team could go in and work with. They could either extend that, fold in other samples. They could poke holes in it and say, well, should we have changed this assumption or that assumption? But having a construct that allows us to be kind of, again, in between the full branch merge semantics of a Git that may lose a scientist to a construct that's approachable to a non-developer human, but also workable and in a kind of an API first way that the LLMs are most comfortable working, and we can build the clear history of what has been changed, how did we get to this answer, and what are the assumptions that it's based on.
That's really cool. And I think big steps forward in how we can accelerate science, accurate science, and all of that. And, kind of the idea of LLMs as your partner in your science and making that possible is kind of where we are today. And I'd say we've built the foundation models. Now we're operationalizing how to make this work within organizations and within the different users' workflows and whatnot. Where do you kind of, as we tie up, see this going in the next few years? Like, where will AI, powered by an organized Quilt Data kind of data set, take life sciences, would you guess, in the next few years?
Oh, that's a great question. I certainly wish I had my crystal ball, but
this is your Jensen keynote moment.
Yeah, well, let me give you one thing. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw software development as the first discipline that was really disrupted, deeply disrupted by AI and these LLMs. And one of the main reasons that I can look at that and say, why did that happen, is that, first of all, obviously there's incredible training data for that. There's a way for these models to kind of test and iterate quickly. But there's a third element that I don't want to overlook, which is that human teams already had good human processes for collaboration, and we had a mature set of tools that facilitated working in a very disciplined way with those results. So having Git, Docker, NPM, PyPI has made it much easier for the LLMs to come and collaborate with the humans, for the humans to audit what the LLMs have done, and for those teams that are now comprised of agents and humans working together to move faster. Science needs that. It needs an equivalent that will fit for science. It's probably, going to be inspired by the software tools like a Git and a Docker, but it's probably something extension of that is friendlier to the larger scale data sets that come there, the multimodal data sets, and the people that frankly aren't used to, that haven't spent the decade, or in some of our cases, decades, working with these source control tools. So I think having this containerized, folder, scientist-friendly folder metaphor for the versioned, annotated, context-included data set can help scientists and LLMs work together to accelerate that discovery.
So, Kevin, as you're kind of looking towards the future, and as organizations are thinking about potentially engaging Quilt Data or embarking on a journey like this, do you have any guidance of the types of things they should be looking at or the types of kind of data construct policies to be putting in place while they're on this journey?
Absolutely. And I think that, data construct is something that is a great way of framing the question. I see a lot of tension inside an org between wanting to have very harmonized and standardized data. And that tends to lead organizations to a centralized data catalog, to centralized data dictionaries and one thing, which is all fine and good for the things that are in there. But the friction to get data in there means that there tends to be a lot of data that stays outside of that system. So I tend to recommend something different, which is a very simple concept. Standardize in your organization what it means to be a data set. Have a standard data set construct. And there's a few things that I think are really important to building a data set construct that would work for life sciences and work at scale to handle the diversity of data that they have. So first of all, it needs to be flexible. Life sciences data has many different file types and formats. And it's kind of an inside joke, but if you're in life sciences, they invent formats for no good reason. And they have tools that expect these invented formats. So
we've actually had guests on this show talk about specifically that issue and like, whose job is it to fix this? And everyone's like, oh, I don't know. Is it government? Is it industry? Is it users? I don't know.
Oh my God. Don't get me started. I've been ranting about this since 2015, but it needs to be, your data set construct needs to not fight that battle. Fight that battle somewhere else. Your data set construct needs to be flexible to hold any type of data. And here's the key. Hold that data in its native format so it works with the tool set you already have. A life sciences org has, I've heard, hundreds of tools. It might be thousands of different software applications in use at one time. And they're all doing something critical for some person who's doing some very important job in the org. Don't fight that. Build a system that's flexible, that holds the data in its current format. Second, it needs to be version controlled, whether it's for IND or for patent filings or just collaboration, but especially as we get into the era of agentic AI and agent first data analysis, what happened? What did this agent do? And do we need to back it up and try again? Having that version history of the data set is absolutely vital. I'm a big believer in S3. I think Cloud Object Store is just is going to win and be, if there is a final data store. Now, I should caveat that it's really more the object store metaphor. Not all things will literally be in AWS's version of that, but an object store is a really incredible balance between efficiency, incredibly large scale, incredibly cost efficient, and now becoming absolutely ubiquitous in that every tool can use it. So embrace the object store metaphor, use that for both your cloud and your on-prem storage, and use tools and virtualization systems that bridge that to a file system where you need to. But definitely have a system that works, with an object store at its core.
And I think you said this earlier, but you did say it earlier, but you also just emphasized leaning into the standards, whether it's the object store, the data format, and standards-based will probably almost certainly win in this world because AI needs to be able to access everything and it needs to be in a standard everyone can use, right?
Absolutely. Having that standard-based access and leaning into standards and tools that work there, it really will put your org ahead. And then there's two more points here, which would be, first of all, labeled. Data sets have context, and context management for AI is absolutely critical. So understanding that metadata of, both at the individual asset level and at the collection level, where did this data come from? What sample is it from? What experiment did it run? Who produced it? Where did we find it? What is it intended for? And then the final thing is all that standard. We're really talking about the most critical asset that you have in the information age. The company's data is the unique advantage and unique moat. So keep that. Use an open source format where your company, are in control of your data. and those properties, if you can lock that down to find a standard for a data set where you keep all that together and do that across your organization, I think that will both unlock current collaboration between humans and AI agents and set you up for future, future proof as AI continues to, improve at this incredible pace.
And as people who are listening are thinking about, how would I bring this into my organization? Is this the right fit? You touched on at the beginning something I think that's really important, that you have a value proposition to different members of the organization who care about different things: IT costs, data silos, data regulation, science, and everybody who in the organization has different influences there. As people listen to this show and think, I think Quilt might be right for my organization. Do you have certain organization size, data set size, or any parameters on who's a good fit and who's not? Or can you give any guidance there?
Sure, happy to. So, from a data size, I mean, Quilt is the best fit for data sets that are, larger, for companies that are generating significant volumes of data where cloud object store really makes a lot of sense. I mean, our commercial solutions built on AWS and S3. The open source and all this Quilt packages, this version contextualized data set is, Apache 2 free and clear open source license, can work with file-based data on any POSIX file system or in the cloud in an object store. But for org size, we've gone from just a pair of founders all the way up to some of the, not the largest, but some of the larger pharmaceutical companies. So the org size scales a lot, but it really is best for multimodal data, unstructured and structured. Typically a combination, but at least unstructured. If you're pure row column, I think you're better off, honestly, just using one of the lake houses out there. And I'm a big believer in icebergs. So, but organization that has their own AWS account that really wants to govern their own data. I mean, there are orgs that just prefer a full SaaS platform where somebody else manages everything, is a different fit. Quilt is built around an open standard for companies that all the data Quilt runs in your account, and all the data sits in customers' accounts. So I'd say that's a principle there. But anyone that has large-scale multimodal data, and particularly teams with different skill sets, or bench scientists and computational scientists both on the same team, and working in AWS.
And how do people get started? Do they go to the marketplace and kind of spin it up and run it on their own? Is there a consulting gig that you like to do on the front end? And kind of let's point folks in the right direction so that if they're interested, they get started successfully.
That's a great idea. I mean, the first thing to do is just call us, send me an email. I assume my email's in the link somewhere.
We can definitely put it in the show notes if you want us to.
Yeah, put it in the show notes. Call me, email me, whatever. I'd say the most typical path, most of the life sciences companies we work with already have someone helping them with their cloud. And whether that's just something like their AWS account manager or, an actual consulting firm that specializes in life sciences and AWS consultancy, we often work with them to, install the system. We would install a small version first and, work on just one specific application. Maybe we would take sequencing, maybe we would take, one or two assay types, and we'd build out. They'd be connecting their lab via storage gateway to S3, and we would pick up the data as it lands in S3 and help present that to the scientists and make it feel a lot more like the systems that they're used to while living in the cloud. So again, kind of start small with a single application, work with the consulting partners that you already have, and definitely just talk to our team. We're not a over the top sell you kind of team. We're AWS experts. We're happy to talk through the real problems that you have and just learn along with you. We'd love to learn. We'd love to hear what companies are working on, and what are the challenges that they face.
Excellent. Hey, Kevin, this was a great conversation. I appreciate you taking time to join the show. Anything else you want to leave our audience with before we tie up?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm really interested to hear your feedback and thinking about this idea of a data set construct. The construct really focused on a data set that is a collection of data of individual artifacts that are related to each other, related with some common metadata or context, and how we can build the best contextualized data set for humans and AI to collaborate.
Awesome. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.